Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind Podcast, episode 170. Great episode today. One of those ones that we know people will tune into because it's called How to Find a Property Development Site. Bob and I will talk about all the things that you need to do to find how you will find a property development site. You're going to love this episode. So let's jump on into episode 170. Hello, welcome to episode 170. How to find a property development site. It's like the 65 million dollar question, Bob?
That'll do. 65 million sounds good to me.
It's the $65 million question. 65,000, whatever.
Million, I like millions.
Okay, 65 million question or whatever, I've lost it. But anyways, how do you find a site? We're going to really open up your eyes today and people are going to love it, don't you think?
Always, yeah, finding a site, that's where it all starts.
Bob, what's your tip for the week?
Oh, well, as we know, daylight saving kicks in the first Sunday. I think it's 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
You know it's coming.
Yes.
Months away, you know it's coming. Days away, you know it's coming. And then it happens. And then you forget. And so you go and book a meeting and you're an hour late because we live in Queensland, so we don't change because the southern states go forward an hour. And, sure enough, first day, caught me.
Oh, day one you got caught. On the Sunday
got
you
caught,
did.
phone in an hour late. Nevertheless, it still went well. But yeah, you just got to be on the ball.
You do.
And for the first week, it's just chaos.
Oh, I know. Because we get used to writing, that'll be Queensland time, or that will be Victoria time, or that'll be whatever time. And we've got our 3-day workshop this weekend, which, by the way, is going to be phenomenal. It is an absolute sellout. Huge amount of people coming to the workshop, or 3 days of full property development, not just people talking about what they did, actual property development. It's going to be very exciting, fabulous networking. But we've got the different state thing happening.
Yeah.
And that gets a little bit confusing for some people. They'll leave one state in one time and then land in a different time. But anyways, we'll work it out, won't we?
We will.
We will. Okay, it's time to give away our book this year. What is going on with me today?
Millions, years.
Oh my goodness, I'm having a real mare.
Well, you're putting in a big effort on the workshop and aren't getting everything ready, so maybe you fried your brain.
I'm slightly fried. So Secrets of Property Millionaires Exposed this week goes to Simon Abraham. And Simon, I'm going to hand this to you at the workshop, which is rather exciting. Hopefully you listened to this before then. You should do. And on that, everybody, I'm sorry about last week's episode. Our interview with Liam Nagel, it actually went out late. There was a little bit of a technical glitch. So we're still sort of having some teething problems with a few things, but it is now out, so you will be able to listen to it, and it's a fabulous episode, and I like it a lot because he says really nice things about me. So, that makes it nice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does to me anyway. Okay, so Bob, we're going to be talking about how to find a property development site. I have a list of things I'm going to go over here and really ask you to unpack them for people who want to learn about property development. Now, for those of you who don't know, and you've been under a rock if you don't, Bob's been developing for 40 years, so he has done his fair share of finding development sites, everything from splitters to duplexes to townhouses to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 20-pack subdivisions, high-rises, retirement villages. Have I missed anything?
That'll do.
That'll do. Start. That's a good start. So he knows how to find a site and understands what there is to know. And the fact that we still develop now, we're still in the game, and he's still in the game. So we're all over the site finding thing. So Bob, what is the first thing that you do? Yeah, let's put this on you.
Okay.
Yeah, what's the first thing you do when you are looking for a site?
Well, I like to have the end game in mind. Like, what type of project do I want to do? Because we don't just do residential projects. I mean, you mentioned retirement village. We do industrial projects as well, commercial. So we're right across the gamut. So, and we're doing residential and we're doing commercial, industrial at the same time. So really, it's a matter of working out, where do you want to start? My recommendation is when you're starting out in property development, though, to start out in residential because it's something that you should be comfortable with. You live in a residential property. They're all around you. You're familiar with them. You may even have an investment property, although you don't have to, of course, to be a property developer. But it's something that you're familiar with, so it's a good place to start. And then, get a little bit of experience behind you. You can move into the commercial area. So, and if it's residential, what type? Am I looking for a subdivision? Am I looking to do a little townhouse project, maybe a duplex? I wouldn't recommend you start off with apartments, but you could get to that point. So I like to have the end game in mind. What am I looking for, first of all? What type of project? And also probably the size and scale of the project, which has got a lot to do with what you can afford.
Can I ask a curveball already?
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Love your curveballs.
So, Bob, have you ever made your decision, you've got your end game in mind, you know what you're going to be doing, and you go out site hunting and you find something completely different?
Yeah, that can happen.
So tell me your experience of that.
Because you should be building up a network of agents, perhaps even buyers agents. So you could be out there looking for an upmarket duplex, and all of a sudden one of your contacts, one of your agents, buyer's agent, suddenly comes up with something totally different. But look, at the end of the day, really, it's about making money.
Yes.
It sounds crass, but that's what it's about. We want to make money. We don't want to lose money. We want to make money. We want to make a good profit. And so we shouldn't get tunnel vision on it. But like I said before, we have to work within our means. So if you can afford to do a duplex, don't go looking at 8 or 10 apartment blocks. Wrong project, wrong type of project, too big. Unless you've got some good investors in tow, of course. But yeah, work within your budget. Choose the type you're going to do. Understand from your budget the funds that you have or the funds that you can get hold of, the size of that project, and then you'd start to narrow it down where you're going to do it.
And I suppose you begin with the end in mind. At least if you've got, I'm going to call it a goal because that's my go-to.
Yep.
If you've got a goal, meaning you have the end in mind, what you're wanting to do, and say you do stumble across something else, at least you were going in a direction towards something versus that whole pray and spray sort of type of hunt, meaning you have no idea what you're looking for, and that's when you'd get confused, hey?
If you were to say to yourself, let's say you live in Sydney, I'll do any project in Sydney, I just want to find a good one. You won't find one.
No.
Because you haven't narrowed the field down at all.
Or there'll be probably one person who does, and then they'll want to send us an email. So maybe the odd one person does, but it's not really a thing. No, it's not. So your tip for this would be just have a clear goal in mind.
Have your end goal in mind, yeah.
Yeah, and work toward that, but be open to opportunity.
Always be open to opportunities, because as you build your contacts, as you get more involved in property development, you'll build up a network of contacts in a whole range of areas. And, agents, real estate agents, buyers agents, in terms of finding sites, but, even moving forward, town planners, architects, you name it, valuers, financiers, you'll build your network as you go forward, as you advance in property development. And the bigger your network, the more chance you have of coming across something.
Okay, next step or next help for how to find a property development site, as in a site that you can use, is understanding the market, Bob. And we say that often, and we say it in our masterclasses, and I'm sure everybody else says that because, that's what you do. But just give me some idea of what understanding the market means for somebody who's looking to buy a property development site.
Yeah, and that's important to understanding the market, but what market are we talking about? Because there's so many markets, there's markets within markets. You can go to, say, RP data, for instance, and you can see the data for the whole of Australia. How much did property values go up last year in the whole of Australia? But that's no use for us. And then you have to narrow the field down. Well, what about New South Wales? Well, that's nice, but that's not good enough. Well, what about Sydney? Oh, well, you're getting closer. But you have to go down to at least suburban level. And when you get the suburban level nailed, you can even go down to the sub-suburban level. And so when you're talking about a market, I think we need to understand, it's got a lot to do with location. What's going on? What's the market generally in that area where you're looking? What is that area? Is it a council area? Is it a suburb or 2 or 3 suburbs? And the markets can change. You could have a market doing one. I keep picking on Sydney. I'll go to Melbourne now. You can have something happening in a localised market, say west of Melbourne. And then northeast of Melbourne, you could choose some suburbs there, and it's quite different what's happening there. And so it's not just a national thing. It's not even just a state thing. It's down to suburban level. So you need to understand the local market, what's going on there, you know.
Do you mean by that as well, I'm just going to bump in here, understanding demographics, age, trends, I mean, and if we break that down, even you listening now, if you look where you live and maybe you own a house or maybe you rent one, you could look around and you'd actually get an idea on what's going on where you live in your market. What's the age demographic? Do people generally own the house here, or are they renting a house here? Are they mostly around sort of 25 to 35, or are they over 55s? You can get an idea pretty easily, can't you?
Yeah,
if you have a good look.
There's a lot of data these days, of course, that you can access. Some of it you pay for, but some of it's free. So a lot of that suburban data, or data, what do you want to call it?
I like data.
Data.
But I have a Kiwi accent, so.
Okay. A lot of that you can get for free. So you can have a look at a suburb, you can have a look at the demographic, the age demographic, the different, say, 10-year bands of age, what percentage of the population's in there, even in terms of income and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of demographics that you can get that's free. And you could also, if you want to have a little bit, you could go to the local shopping centres and just see who's walking around there. That's a pretty good idea.
I don't know about shopping centres, Bob. There's some horrific monsters walking around shopping centres, I think. I see people walk around shopping centres in their pyjamas sometimes.
Well,
you do?
Yeah, but I mean, you go to one of our, because we live on the beach in a really nice area, you get a lot of retirees. You go to our local shopping centre, there's a lot.
There's a coffee club with a lot of retired people having coffee.
The average age of a person in our local coffee club is probably about 70, dead set. But look, anyway, seriously, there's a lot of free data out there, and getting a feel for it, and even the breakup of the difference between owner-occupiers and investors as well, and a lot of that data is available. You have what are sometimes called dormitory suburbs, and that's suburbs that have a high percentage of renters. And then you have other suburbs that have a high percentage of owner-occupiers. And so that might influence you depending on what your target market is going to be as well.
And the fact that you can look at all of that online, I mean, when you think about finding a site, it's actually quite exciting when you get to do all that research.
It's detective work.
Yeah, you actually become a detective and find out what's actually going on. But my favourite tip, and when I say this now, you'll drive around and notice, you can always tell where it's a rental area where people are renting, because there's always a lot of cars outside, because there's more than a home usually has a car park, maybe two, maybe one child or whatever. Maybe they have 2 or 3 cars, but houses that are rented often have a truckload of cars out the front, don't they?
Almost one for every bedroom.
Yeah, so you can, and they're always out the front. I particularly can see a suburb that we drive through sometimes, and it's just shockers with cars everywhere. It's like, rental area. Yeah,
and particularly some of the, older areas. And when I say older, I mean it could even be like 20 years, 30 years old, where quite often back then the garage or the car accommodation requirement was less, and where you could do 3 and 4 bedroom townhouses and only need 1 car park. A lot of that's changed. Councils, generally speaking, over the years have pushed for more car parks. But when you got, particularly in an area, say near a university, I'm thinking of a suburb near a university, there's lots of apartments and townhouses, and 4 or 5 students in there and 1 car park. 4 are going to be on the street. In fact, the car park is probably full of stuff. A pool table and a bar, and then all 4 of their 5 of their cars are on the street. So.
Actually, that's a really good point. So, Bob, is there a rule of thumb about preferring to build or develop, not build, preferring to develop for an owner-occupier or a renter? Does it really matter? Is there, would you say you're going to make more money with one than the other?
Look, firstly, it does vary. So, when you're developing something for a tenant, for a renter, some of the fit out can be different from what you do for an owner-occupier. Also, the more upmarket areas are going to be more orientated towards owner-occupiers than renters. So if you're talking sort of just roughly mid-market, it could be either. It could be young families, but could be renters. So it has a lot to do with the suburb. I mean, we've been involved in some, more upmarket projects. where really the target is owner-occupiers. And you know that when you go in. It's good if you have an idea when you're starting to develop what your target market is. I've done a lot of investment development in my life, probably more than I've done owner-occupier.
Really? What's that for? Why was that, Bob?
Well, particularly back in the days when you had to get a lot of pre-sales and that sort of thing. It's not hard. Well, I shouldn't say it's not hard. To get pre-sales on an investment property is way easier than get pre-sales from an owner-occupier.
What's the reason?
Owner-occupiers don't like buying off plan. It's an emotional purchase for an owner-occupier, so they want to walk through it and touch it, visualise, is their lounge going to fit, and all that. So they need to see it, ideally. Investors, it's more about, the location.
How much money will they make, really?
Well, yeah.
How many bedrooms can I get in there?
Yeah, how close to, transport and those sorts of things. But also, the rental yield, what's the occupancy level in that area? They're quite analytical.
Yeah.
I remember doing a 20 townhouse project one year, and we targeted investors. But look, it could have been owner-occupiers as well, but all 20 of those went to investors because it was that sort of market in that sort of locality. And I did target investors as well, I'd have to say that, not owner-occupiers. But, and it can swing around a little bit. When say a market's been through a bit of a lull, maybe even prices have pulled back a bit, when it starts to pick up, it's nearly always the investment market that starts to pick it up.
What's the reason for that?
Because, yields, prices are, low, rental might still be strong, good yields, and they start to see a bit of growth, and they're looking at the analytics, so they start to get in there. Owner-occupiers tend to move in a little bit later, but then they'll stay around as well longer than a lot of investors will as that market matures.
So we've covered off with have a goal, begin with your end in mind. Then we've looked at demographics of the area that you're looking, if you're starting with resi, obviously, or not necessarily, even if you're doing industrial, I suppose, or anywhere. Demographics kind of matter.
You're looking at different drivers when you're talking about that.
Yeah, drivers is a good word. But we're kind of swinging toward resi, which most people are doing.
Yeah, it's a good place to start.
Yeah. And then the next one, Bob, we've got location.
Used to be a TV program called that.
I think it's still on.
Is it?
Might probably repeats, but anyway. Yeah, so location. What are we looking for? If we're looking for a development site, what are we looking for when it comes to location?
Good idea if you've got your target market in mind as well. Let's say owner-occupier, let's say upper market owner-occupier.
Let's talk about my son. Owner-occupier, 2 children.
Yep. So it's probably not your average demographic though. The suburb he lives in is quite expensive.
Okay, let's not use him.
Let's not use him.
We'll use somebody else.
Yeah, but look, owner-occupiers tend to like to live in other areas where there's a high percentage of owner-occupiers.
Yes.
The housing tends to be a bit more expensive, but it's just better looked after. It's...
You're less likely to have crazy parties and neighbours and
all
noise
sorts of
and
stuff too many
on.
cars and so there are those suburbs, and as I said, they tend to be more in the top part of the middle of the market, or even the upper market. They tend to be the owner occupiers particularly, and so they like those areas. These days it's hard to be too far from a large shopping centre really these days, But shops transport, it's all relative to them, but it's probably even more relative to investors. So in the investment market, the prices tend to be a bit lower, and they tend to be more in those dormitory suburbs.
What do you mean by dormitory suburbs?
Dormitory, you think of it,
I thought you meant dormant. You mean dormitory.
Dormitory,
dorm.
Where there's lots of beds, a dormitory.
Yep.
Yeah, they call them dormitory suburbs because there's lots of renters there, lots of beds and bedrooms.
Okay.
Transport is definitely a big thing with those. Proximity to work. It's relative to both, but particularly to renters and price as well. So
and
could be a different area.
What about looking at what the future of that suburb is?
Yeah.
Is it good to know that sort of thing? What's coming?
Changes in suburbs,
doing the research.
Gentrification of suburbs. We've seen that in all cities over many years. I can remember, Paddington in Sydney is a pretty expensive suburb. It's in close. I can remember staying there as a 10-year-old kid, This is a few years ago, so we're talking back colonial days, when just after Captain Bligh, MacArthur was around, and
most people listening don't even know what you're talking about, Paul.
No, probably not. Unless you're good on Australian history. Look, bear in mind it's quite a while ago, and it was a rough suburb.
Yes.
Back in I was a 10-year-old. I stayed there with a relative of it doesn't matter. It was a relative of a neighbour who came on a trip with my mum and dad. I was a little 10-year-old. We stayed there. It was a rough suburb. There was stuff happening, bodies being found here and there, people bashed in parks. Like, it was a pretty rough old place.
Has much changed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Prices. No, and of course the type of person that lives there, because those type of, as things change, people that used to live there can't afford to live there anymore, and they sort of move
they cash
somewhere
out.
else. I don't know if they cash out. I mean, most of them probably rented back then, but even those that owned, they grow up, they get old and they die. So there's a lot of suburbs. The suburb I grew up in Brisbane, for instance, I grew up down the Bayside at Manly, in the Wynnum Manly area. And when I lived there, it was just mostly older people, really. Probably, I suppose when I was a kid, 40s, 50s, but even older in 60s, whereas that whole demographics changed. And probably even 20, 30 years ago now, a lot of younger people started to come in. They started to renovate the old houses. They'd lift them up, they'd fill underneath, they'd reno them, And now the demographics quite different. It's quite that area now, which is very middle class at best, is now quite expensive real estate, and a whole different age group, demographic, whole different in terms of their wealth and their income is very different.
And Bob, how can you tell if a suburb's going to be one of those suburbs? Because where I lived back in New Zealand in Mount Maunganui, way many years before I came along, it was kind of considered the Bronx. Now it's prime. It's like Noosa. It's prime real estate.
It's more expensive than Noosa.
Yeah, it is. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, way more expensive than Noosa. But I mean, it just happens. You can see it happen slowly. It often happens in like a ring from, say, the CBD. Now, I grew up in Brisbane, so I will use that as an example, but look, it happens pretty well everywhere. The centre of Brisbane, we have a Paddington in Brisbane, as you know, and it was that old, rough sort of area, even in my youth, and Wollongabba, and, you wouldn't walk down the street in Wollongabba.
Now it's prime.
Back in those days, but those close-in suburbs, and now they're very expensive suburbs, and they were sort of like the first ring out of the city, a circular ring, and then you can go out and you can have a look over the years, each decade even, where they move out.
So, and that's pretty stock standard.
Yeah, pretty much.
So if somebody's got a lot of money, they could buy now for their children for the future. Or for
anything,
generations.
You'd be doing all right.
Yeah, well, there you go. So then the next thing that we look for when looking for a property development site is understanding the zoning and planning regulations. And the go-to place for that is obviously your council. But what are we looking for there, Bob?
Well, we want a zoning that's compatible with what we want to do. And so a city or a shire or whatever, it's cut up into zones, and each zone basically tells you what you can and can't do. And there's a number of residential zones. They tend to change as densities increase. You could have a basic zone, which is just one house on one lot. Next step up could be duplexes. Next step up could be townhouses. Next step up could be apartments. And then you could end up, depending on where you are, with 10, 15-storey buildings or more. So, and there's a whole heap of commercial and business zonings and all sorts of things.
And mixed use.
Mixed use.
Bit of both.
Bit of both. But zoning is important, because if it's an area where we only have one house per lot, for instance, which is normally the least dense of all the zonings, you can't just pop in there and do it in an apartment block. People say, I'll get a rezoning, I'll get the zoning change. Big chance, no chance.
How hard is it to get a rezoning?
Impossible in that sort of situation.
Impossible.
Rezonings can happen. They tend to happen more on the outskirts where there's larger parcels of land, and it often happens more to do with residential subdivisions. Although closer in there can be some upgrade in densities. Like I can remember back in around 2013 or 12, whenever it was, I'm harping back on Brisbane, but this could happen anywhere in any city. They redid the city plan, which has, part of it is all the zonings. And certain suburbs, they increased the zoning from what was typically 2-storey townhouse to 5-storey apartments.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so that was an upzoning when the new town plan came in. And so that adds quite a bit of value to a property. If you had an 800 square metre property back then that would have taken 4 townhouses, all of a sudden you can do a 5-storey. And even if you've got, say, ground level parking, on-grade parking, you get about 13 or 14 apartments there. So that increased. So that rezoning, though, was done by the council.
How often do they look at that? Because I know of another area that was all just one lot, one house, and then they changed to every second plot could have a duplex.
Yeah.
Or even more. Was it more or just duplex where they did that?
That was more just duplexes.
So one house, and then the next one could be a duplex, and the next one had to be a one house. But will they eventually, Bob, do you think, go back to that suburb and make them all duplexes or not?
Oh, look, it could happen. What happened originally, as you said, you could do duplexes in there, but you had to have an 800 square metre lot. I know the suburb you're talking about. The problem is there was hardly any 800 square metre lots. When they were all subdivided 50 years ago, they were nearly all 550. A big one was 600 metres, and so there's not a lot of 800 metre lots. And it wasn't worth buying 2 lots just to do a duplex because that was 2 houses, But then they dropped the minimum size of a duplex to 500 square metres. That's what made it change the game, because that meant nearly every lot in that suburb potentially could be a duplex, but then they didn't want duplex city.
Why not?
So they...
What's wrong with duplex city?
It's a rapid change in amenity, really. I mean,
I
thought it was a big thing to drop it to 500.
Right.
I would have thought maybe they would have gone to 600 because there were a number of 6s, but not lots. But they did it to 5, and then. But they said, well, you can't do 2 side by side, so you can only at best do every second one. Yeah, so that's an example, once again, of council doing it. I've rezoned stuff myself, but not in that close proximity, more on the outskirts, where I've changed a one once that was a rural or semi-rural zoning into a residential zoning, and that rural zone land adjoined what was a residential subdivision. So it would have been sort of the next land to get rezoned. So it wasn't that big a deal to get it rezoned, but it put the value up quite a lot. And then simultaneously I got an approval to do a retirement village, which added even more. So that was a fairly big uplift and a rezoning. But a rezoning that we were fairly confident we could get, and we did.
So what gives you that confidence that you can get a rezoning? Where does that come, how would you know that it's even possible to rezone? And like you alluded to at the beginning, people say, I'll get a rezoning, and you said, yeah, fat chance, or whatever you said. Well, what made you think that you could?
I'm talking about something closer in an urban area that's zoned for 2-storey townhouses.
Yeah.
You're not going to go and suddenly have your block zoned for a 5-storey apartment block. Because first of all, you would set a precedent. Next thing, everybody who's got the same block as you, like the other 10,000 people in the suburb, would all want it changed. And councils don't do that. But this was on the outskirts. And there was, as I said, a residential subdivision had moved out. It would have been rezoned itself at some point. They built the subdivision, houses got built, normal, 600 metre lots. And then the next parcel of land that adjoined that was the rural land that I got. And it was a guy running cattle on it, actually. But you see, it was the next thing to happen. It adjoined existing residential. It wasn't like a kilometre up the road and I wanted a piece of residential, half a kilometre up the road with a lot of rural in between. It was the next thing to go. We had a pre-lodgement meeting with council, gauge their opinion, see what they thought about the whole idea. They liked the idea. They said, no, that's fine. That'd be the sort of the next thing to do. Talk to them about a retirement village. They loved that idea. This is one of the few councils that I haven't had a big punch-up with. Actually.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking, crikey. Yeah.
And so that's, you're more likely to get that sort of rezoning through.
Okay, so then we've gone through those steps. Now we're up to financial feasibility. And interestingly, today I had a phone call. I haven't even told you the story yet,
okay.
Bob. So I get a phone call when I'm out getting some name tag labels for the workshop because we'd run out. And somebody rang me and said, I talked to you a while ago. And I said, yes, okay. And he said, we've got a buyer's agent's business. But he said, we run different to other. He tried to quickly sell himself because I'm like, yeah, okay, you're going to sell yourself to me, perfect. And he said, we only get development sites. And I said, okay, do you know what makes a development site stack up? And he said, we've even got a few with DAs. And I said, well, mostly if it's got a DA in this current market and not for good. I said, mostly if it's got a DA in this current market, it doesn't stack up, I would be thinking. But they had no idea, never done any feasibilities. And so it's really easy to say, I'm a buyer's agent, but unless you actually understand how to do it. But anyway, that was my this morning's conversation. I told him to ring me back next Friday.
I mean, there are some good buyer's agents out there.
For sure, we've had some great ones.
But there's a lot of very ordinary ones. And as you know, there was a course a few years ago where you could basically do a 3-day course and learn, how to become a buyer's agent. Then you had to just go and get your licence, which isn't hard to do. It's just a few days of study. And so all of a sudden the market's just flush with buyer's agents, all having been told they can make a fortune at it. And so I'm sure.
And they probably can at finding properties for people for people to buy a rental, but not necessarily.
But there were so many suddenly came on the market of buyer's agents,
but not for development sites.
Inexperience. So I think that's sort of settled out a lot. But no, when it comes to development sites, I mean, a buyer's agent, if they don't understand anything about property development, they're just going to keep throwing stuff up at you. And while I'm prepared to look at it, how much rubbish do I want thrown at me? I'd like a buyer's agent to at least have the ability to be able to put it through the sieve and have some idea if it's likely to stack up.
Would that be even just to do a 5-minute Feaso?
Yeah, look, we've had buyer's agents do our course for the sole purpose that they understand property and feasibilities a lot better so that they can get good deals to take to their clients. Because if they've got some rubbish site, they're just wasting their time and effort. They're better off with, 6 things that work to try and sell than 100 things that they don't even know if they work or not.
Well, they assured me that they found property development sites, we have had a good experience, and I've given great ones to mentoring students. So I didn't. I was kind of okay. I said, well, if you haven't done any education, I don't believe you. I didn't say it. I thought it.
There's a lot of rubbish goes in the bin when you're looking at development sites and you're doing the feasibilities, and you get to a point where you can tell pretty quickly. And we teach that. Yeah,
exactly. So that's why this is what we're on is feasibilities. You have to know how to do a feasibility. And I alluded to the 5-minute Feaso. And then once you've done that, even if that works, it doesn't mean it passes the full Feaso, does it?
No, it means that it's worth spending some more time on. This is the thing about when you're out there looking at deals. Look, you're going to look at deals where a lot of them are going to end up in the rubbish bin.
Yep.
Well, that's okay. You don't have to find 5 a day or 5 a week. But a lot of it will end up in the rubbish bin for a whole heap of reasons. Basically, because it doesn't stack up. Why doesn't it stack up? Maybe the person who's selling it wants too much. There's different reasons why it might or might not. And it's like everything. You'll troll through them and you get a good one. That's the one you jump on. So, but it's a process, and you have to know how to do the numbers, because property development is very unemotional. It's just about numbers. Do the numbers work? Do the numbers produce sufficient profit that you can get the finance from the financier to go and do the development? That's what it is. It's pretty simple, but you have to know how to do it. And
we'll just say it again for the 497th time. It has to stack up so you can get the money from your financier. So it's not about it just makes some money. It has to make a certain amount of money.
Yeah, exactly. And the financier decides on that margin. The valuer decides on that margin, and that's their safety margin. It has to make a certain amount of profit. And they're the deals that stack up. When I say stack up, that's what I mean. And they're the ones you do. And
then something else we've got to consider is when you're doing your feasibility, are those extra costs like infrastructure, sort of civil works, things that you may not consider?
Well, you've got to know all the costs. This is the trouble. Look, I've been around for 40 years. I've seen people make lots of money. I've seen people lose money. If I see people get into trouble occasionally, I like to try and work out why. nobody that's going through our courses, but like you see people will get odd phone calls. Where did it go wrong? You know what? It nearly always goes wrong, 90% of the time. It goes wrong on their due diligence and their feasibility, which is really pretty much the same thing. It's the numbers and a few other
And when you say due diligence and feasibility, it's which numbers apply, as in what would that particular thing cost, and just little things. In fact, I had a conversation with Aaron this morning about another industrial site, and he said he was going to run it past you, Bob, but he said he was unsure of some of the services, actually. Services getting to the site.
Right.
And I was like, that's definitely a Bob question, I don't know. So it's kind of...
He won't even crunch his numbers until he's answered that.
No, yeah, and he can't. He said, he threw in the Feeso, he goes, I threw in $1 million, that was a guess.
So he'll be talking to engineers to sharpen up that price.
Yeah, and he's not even going to do that till he speaks with you. So that's just understanding the due diligence for the feasibility to make sure that you get it all right. And another thing, just because a piece of land is cheap, Bob?
Yeah.
What's the rule of thumb there?
Oh, well, cheap, yeah. Look, what is cheap? I've seen sites that have a development approval that have a negative value.
I remember you doing that deal or no deal.
I've got examples. I'll do one at the workshop this week that's basically almost worth nothing as a development site. It has other uses that you could probably do other than property development that has a higher use than that, but yeah, you can.
Grazing cattle.
Well, yeah, funny you should say that. I've seen people buy subdivisions. I mean, I've seen big companies buy subdivisions and they can't get the services there, or they can't get the stormwater off the site, or things happen, and they buy it. Just bad due diligence,
I think you've alluded to one a few episodes, maybe 10 episodes ago. You talk about that story.
Oh yeah, I know, because I used to work in the corporate world. Don't think that it's only little developers that sometimes make mistakes. Big guys can make them too, and you nod your head sometimes that they're like stupid. I got plenty of examples of big companies doing stupid stuff that a lot of small developers wouldn't do.
No better. So then, what about the last one? I think this is the last one, or maybe it's not. What are the red flags to watch out for? Oh no, it's not the last one. I've got one more. What are the red flags to look out for when you're looking? We're doing how to find a property development site. What do we look out for mostly? What's your number one?
I'll look the services, getting service connections. I talked about due diligence going hand in glove with feasibility, and that's what it is. So let's say, there's an old house there, you're going to knock it down, you're going to build 3 townhouses. That could be the thing. Well, can you connect the sewer to those 3 townhouses? I mean, the house might be connected, but the 3 townhouses consume more of the site. What about the back one? Can it get a connection? Remember, everything has to flow downhill, and can you get rid of the stormwater off the site? And so just because it had a house on it doesn't mean you can do the same things with 3 townhouses. And these are really important things. Particularly if a block slopes down from the road, you've got to look at things like sewage and stormwater. Can you get those connections? That's one of the first things. There's other things. I mean, flooding. Does it flood? Does it have an overland flow? A lot of these things these days, because a lot of council websites are quite sophisticated and have a lot of town planning material on, a lot of mapping and this sort of thing, and a lot of it you can actually do from just sitting at your desk. But flooding will kill a deal. I can think of one person phoned me once. He bought a site and didn't realise when he settled that it flooded.
Oh no!
And he said, "Can I still develop it?" And the answer was no, you can't. You can't fill it to do anything with it. That sort of thing. Overland flow is similar.
Soil?
Oh, well, I guess when you're talking about soil, there's a couple of things there. One's contamination.
How often is there contaminated soil?
Oh, not much on infill. So just to explain, a lot of the developments we do, what we call infill. So they're in the suburbs that are all, well established, could have been established for 150 years, who knows. And there's houses there, and what we're doing generally is we're developing to a high density. So like the example I just said, we might knock down the old house, build 3 townhouses. We're increasing density. That's infill. So those sort of things you're not likely to find contamination, because what was there beforehand was an old house. It can happen on sites, particularly sites that have had some commercial use, maybe an service station. There's a lot of old service station sites got sold over the years, and some of those did have contamination. And in a lot of places, you could sell it just as it was, and the next person who bought it had to deal with it. These days, a lot of councils want you to deal with the contamination first, but contamination. I bought a site once to do some apartments. It used to be an old lolly factory, and I thought, well, it was an old factory, although probably, the most poisonous thing they used was probably sugar.
Yeah.
So I did have an allowance in there of $50,000 in case, maybe some oil had spilt from some machinery over the years, and you couldn't tell because there was an old factory there that we had to demolish, but I put an allowance in there for contamination. When I got it tested after we demolished the factory, it had quite a high level of contamination. It actually cost $150,000 to remediate.
Ooh.
So it was $100,000 extra. It was a decent sized project. It was 22 apartments, so it could absorb it. What I found out, we couldn't work out why it had arsenic and a whole heap of other things in the soil.
Were they putting that in the lollies?
No.
Oh, good.
Back in 1964, there was a factory next door to the lolly factory that had paint. It was a paint sort of factory. It burnt down. A lot of the chemicals then leached down, it was a little bit higher, the land was a little bit higher than the lolly factory, and leached underneath the lolly factory.
Holy moly.
And settled there. And 40 years later, whatever it was when I did it, that's when we discovered it. Now, you couldn't pick that because I actually looked next door and it was a 2-story office block. Just, people in there, in an office at desks. And I thought, okay,
so you made the
no
assumption.
contamination there.
All good.
Not realising 1964 was when it all happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much when we're looking at red flags to watch out for. So, Bob, what about tips for securing that site? Once we've found out, what tips would you recommend for securing it?
Well, do your due diligence fast so that you know that it does stack up, and then you have to move quickly. Now, that's if it's on the open market, because if it is, there'll be competition looking for it. So you can't muck around, you need to move. If it's perhaps an auction coming up, then you do have a bit more time. You might have 4, 5, 6 weeks, depending on when you find out about it, to do that due diligence and set your figure. Well, get it done. Yep. And put your best foot forward. But like be ready. Always be ready to move.
What about negotiation?
Well, yeah, negotiating on price and that sort of thing, or conditions. So there's 2 parts to it. One's price, one's condition. So, you want to get the best price you can and the best conditions. And sometimes you might give away a little bit on one to get the other. And often it's through an agent. It's always, I much prefer to deal with the owner direct. But some agents don't like you doing that because they're damn scared they're going to backdoor them and they'll miss out on their commission or something anyway. But I'd invite them to the meeting. But look, you can't always do it. Sometimes it's always through an agent. Sometimes it's through an agent. And look, you're negotiating there. But yeah, price is important. Conditions are important too.
So, closing thoughts, Bob. We know because we look for sites too, and we work with our mentoring students who are looking for sites. It's not easy, but it can be done, and it's definitely lightening up a bit because we've got a lot of students right now securing sites, so that's quite exciting. I suppose I want to go down the road of where we see people advertise, I've got a site finding tool that actually finds a site. Yeah,
well, if there was a site finding tool that you could just put your hands on and buy it or lease it or rent it or do whatever you do with the thing, everybody would be finding these sites and these same sites, and that's not what happens out there.
No.
Oh, look, AI is useful. We use it in different areas, and Aaron's really good at it. Of course, we rely on him. You to an extent as well. Not so much me. But yeah, AI is good, but it can't do the footwork that you're doing. And no matter what it says, if it tracks down a deal, it does all the numbers for you. It designs the building.
It can't know soil testing. But not even that. Any program that.
There's lots of stuff out there. Some of it's free, some of it you pay for. That are great tools that'll help you. And it's way faster than when I started out 40 years ago. We didn't have any. There was no internet, no computers, pretty much. So, things are a lot better these days. You can get your hands on a lot of information. But if you think you can sit back and relax, put your feet up, and some program's going to start spitting out deals that stack up, it's not going to happen. And it doesn't happen. If you hear that, you're just getting sold a pup.
Sold a pup? All right. So I think we've covered fairly well. You've really just got to do the work that has always had to be done. It's a lot easier than it used to be because we've got technology on our side, so that's great. Sites are starting to stack up a lot faster, or not having to go through so many to find them. What other good news is there on the site finding front, Paul?
On the site finding front, oh well, look, really, you just got to do the yards. You know, building contacts, all those things. Get out there. Don't think it's the phone's going to ring and there's somebody with a site for you.
Yes.
But gee, it's certainly worth the effort, hey?
Yes, it is.
You know, once you've got a deal, nothing starts till you got that deal. But when you've got it, then
Life changes.
It's just going through all the procedures, with a big payday at the other end. Do everything right.
Well, and that's the key to it all. Do everything right. So, for those of you attending our Property Mastermind workshop this weekend, 3 days of full-on property development and networking, it is full. Numbers are closed. I squeezed in an extra 2 today. Somebody was really desperate. They're please, but it's chockers. So we're in for a real treat. And I hope that if you're considering property development, you're welcome to reach out and have a chat to me about what it is and how we could possibly help you. But other than that, I hope that you found this week's podcast quite useful and we've helped you a lot more, or left you feeling like you know a little bit more about how you'd find a property development site. So we'll catch you next week. Bye for now.
Bye now.